Welcome to the CS Week Marketplace webinar series. CS Week Marketplace offers fresh perspectives and strategies presented monthly by knowledge specialists from the Conference 40 Platinum and Gold sponsors. I am John Sild and I'm with CS Week. I'll be your moderator today along with Pam Jeffries, Vice President of Marketing from Vertex One. She will also facilitate our question and answer session today. Please mark your calendars. CS Week and Conference 41 will be held from May 22nd through the 26th, 2017 at the Fort Worth Convention Center in Fort Worth, Texas. Watch your email and our social media channels for registration information later this fall. This program will be recorded and available for playback along with our other archived presentations later this afternoon. You will find it by selecting Marketplace under the webinar drop-down menu on the csweek.org homepage. Attendees are encouraged to upload questions to the Q&A panel as they arrive. However, all questions will be held until after the presentation for the Q&A segment. Please ensure that you address your questions to all panelists so that we may see them. Today's webinar, Why CIS Satisfaction is Waning and What Utilities are Doing About It. Please welcome everyone and thank you for joining us today. Pam Jeffries with Vertex One, and take it away, Pam.
Thank you, John. It's my pleasure today to welcome everyone to our presentation, where we'll be sharing some research that we recently conducted on CIS satisfaction. So allow me to introduce our speakers today. Alec O'Brien is Vice President at TMG Consulting. A little bit about Alec. He spent more than 20 years with customer information and billing solutions within many vertical markets and began implementing customer information and billing systems for both investor-owned and municipal utilities in 2001. Alec has extensive experience in business requirements definition, solution design, change management, business process analysis, and project management. He's led application assessment, project quality assurance, and software selection efforts at several investor-owned utilities ranging in size from 750,000 to 2.2 million accounts. James Riley is Chief Strategy Officer at Vertex. James is responsible for developing and bringing to market products and services that make it easier for utilities to provide great customer service. James has expertise in customer engagement, analytics, as well as product and service targeting and differentiation based on more than 20 years of consulting experience across a wide range of industries. Prior to joining Vertex, James was Global Head of Innovation for HCL Technologies, a major IT services company where he was tasked with helping clients to create business advantage by leveraging the disruptive technologies of mobility, cloud, and big data. Welcome, Alex and James. I'll now turn the presentation over to you.
Thank you, Pam. So this is James. We're going to really break the presentation up into two sections. I'm going to share with you all the results of the industry survey we conducted and some of the insights that we were able to glean from it. And one of the directions that the survey took us was really a question around the future of Cloud CIS. And I'm going to ask Alec to share some thoughts on what that future might look like within the utility industry. So if we start off with the industry survey, and if you advance, please, Pam. And one more. Just to give everybody an idea of the brief of the survey before we dive into the results, the research was focused very much on customer experience priorities and challenges and how those things would influence both current and future customer information systems. On our behalf, RIM Solutions surveyed more than 50 utilities across North America between December 2015 and January 26. And as I mentioned, this was conducted by RIM Solutions, the Research and Innovation Division of TMG, on behalf of Vertex One. So let's jump into the survey results and start with the demographics, really explaining who we surveyed. From a size of utilities perspective, as measured by metered customers, we were able to survey utilities from well under 50,000 meter customers to well in excess of 1 million metered customers. From an ownership perspective, we felt we were able to get a good mix of primarily investor-owned utilities, municipals, and co-ops. And from a service type perspective, a good spread of service types, electric, gas, water and wastewater, and with a number of the respondents providing one or more service types to their customers. So we were pleased that we were able to get what we felt was a diverse and therefore representative sample of North American utilities. But what did we find out? And Pam, if you'd advance to the next slide, please. Here's a quote from Todd Arnold. And so over the years, historically, we've got ourselves to where we have this one big structure, CIS. It's kind of all or nothing. And as long as we're in that set, we're probably on a 30-year change-out. It's too bad the world of CIS hasn't been more modularized. Maybe going forward, what it ought to be is we change components every 5 to 10 years. So what did we learn about the age and types of CIS platforms out there in the North American market? Let's start with age. And I think it's fair to say that what we discovered is the install base of CIS systems is relatively old, which may not surprise anyone on this call. 51% of utilities are running on CIS platforms that are more than 10 years old. Perhaps even more pertinent is that virtually more than 1 in 3 utilities are running on a CIS platform that's more than 15 years old. When we looked at the different mix of CIS platforms out there, we really saw 2 waves of technology. In wave 1, we see custom and legacy platforms combined with what we've loosely called first-generation systems, be it Banner, Ventix, Customer One, ECIS. And then in the second wave of platforms, we see the more widely recognized now Tier 1 and Tier 2 platforms. Tier 1 being made up primarily of SAP and Oracle, Tier 2 being Kayenta, NISC, Tyler Technologies, etc. From a size of utilities perspective, not surprisingly, the Tier 2 platforms dominate the sub-100,000 metered customer segment, as I think we would all expect. What was of particular interest is that the larger utilities are running the majority of the first wave platforms, so the first generation, as well as customer and legacy platforms. And this isn't inconsistent with our experience as Vertex, where one of our largest customers, who serves more than 3 million metered customers, are running on a mainframe system which has just passed its 25-year-old mark, and I believe that was celebrated within the client. So in conclusion, what we saw was an aging CIS install base there out in the market. And I don't know, Alec, if you have a point of view on what the average life expectancy is for CIS platforms in the market and how, if and how that might change in the future.
Perfect question. One can definitely see, just based on this real data here, that CIS system is supposed to last at least 10 years. A lot of we see regulators allowing investor-owned utilities to get recovery, let's say, within an 11-year framework or so. At least that's what we've seen very recently. And you're right, and I think we'll see this in the next slide as well, is some of the systems that are sticking around the longest are those very, very complex ones that are at some investor-owned utilities. What changes between that kind of first 2 waves you talked about in the second wave is the idea of commercial off-the-shelf. And with commercial off-the-shelf, we don't know if we will necessarily see big waves of replacements moving forward. What we'll see then is upgrades. And I think that's the dramatic difference between having a legacy system that was only supported by the utility itself or some kind of first-generation system that didn't have a product path. The systems now, especially commercial off-the-shelf, they have a product path. And again, we may never see the wave of replacements like we've been seeing in the last several years.
Great input. Thanks, Alec. So Pam, if you advance to the next slide, please. And really kind of when we looked in more detail at the types of systems being run and the age of systems by the size of utility, fairly consistent with that prevalence of customer and legacy platforms in the largest utilities, we also saw that the largest utilities are running on the oldest platform. We also saw, from an on-premise perspective, that all but one of the utilities we surveyed were running their CIS today on-premise. Now, that was interesting for us at Vertex because we've been hosting and managing CIS platforms for our customers for well over 10 years on the eCIS and Enlogix platforms and now on Vertex One. But what's very clear from the survey results is an adoption of cloud, if it's going to happen in the utilities industry, really is in its very early stages. So going back to the largest utilities, and again, I'll ask Alec for comment on this, why do you think it might be that the largest utilities are running on the oldest platform, and is that just a cyclical piece, or is it related to risk and cost, perhaps?
Almost everything around risk with some cost. The large investor owns many times might actually have the budget to move forward. But the big problem is the risk, and they know it. They remember when they replaced last time, let's say maybe 20 years ago, and the risk that was involved there. And they've built now they've built 20 years worth of custom code and specific business rules into these systems. And now to unwind that, to move to a commercial off-the-shelf system is something they know they have to do at some point. It's just the pain and the risk of actually then getting up and doing it. So totally not surprising to see that it's a lot of times the big boys that actually have some of the oldest systems around. And the smaller utilities might actually be a bit more nimble than the large ones.
Thank you. And you and I, Alec, have both worked extensively in the utilities industry, but also in other industries. Do you have any experience or observations from other industries that perhaps have been slow to adopt cloud, but almost there's been a tipping point at which that adoption has accelerated?
I think if we couch it into the utilities industry, the utilities industry has been far more traditional, and I think we see that across the board. I think we see that in terms of just dealing with their own employees, with outreach to customers, that the utility industry has not been the one that's necessarily jumped in the bandwagon. And whereas other markets have, and even big ones like financial or healthcare or other industries like that have maybe been drag kicking or screaming, but they're probably in many cases further along than the utility industry is. And now, as we'll get to in some later slides, since unfortunately they've set the bar on customer expectation and flexibility and nimbleness and moving quickly in customer experience adoption, it's now the utility industry that might have to be the one that actually catches up.
Thank you. So if we advance to the next slide, please, Pam. The next series of questions that we asked as part of the survey were related to challenges utilities were experiencing in relation to their CIS platforms. And I'll just provide this quote from Tim Almond from TMG. Bear in mind that a utility employee is unlikely to be as efficient or effective as a technical consultant from a third party, nor is their organization flexible enough to deal with the peaks and troughs they may experience, managing a live application, or the anticipated resignations and retirements. So what did we see in the survey that really supports the quote from Tim there? So if we move on, Pam. We asked utilities level of satisfaction with a number of criteria, and access to skills was one of the areas that we asked about. It was very clear that utilities struggle to attract and retain the skills needed to run their existing CIS platforms. Less than 1 in 5 utilities being completely satisfied with their ability to do that. And perhaps that's why nearly 2/3 of utilities rely on some degree of help from a third party to run their CIS platform. In terms of keeping their CIS platforms up to date, and perhaps a consequence of the ability to attract and retain the skills, less than 1 in 5 utilities were completely satisfied with their ability to keep up to date, and by not being able to keep up to date, experienced challenges in taking advantage of new features and functions that perhaps were on the product roadmaps for those CIS platforms. But perhaps the biggest concern we identified in the survey, and the biggest challenge that the respondents identified, was the ease of modification of their CIS platforms and the ability to integrate into new technologies. A good example from our own experience here at Vertex is one of our clients who recently moved on to Vertex One did so in large part because they wanted to deploy advanced metering infrastructure, and they felt that their ability to do that, and even if they could do that, the cost of doing so and integrating with their legacy CIS platform would have been cost prohibitive, and that drove them to search for a new CIS platform that could be easily integrated to that technology. So just going back to the modification and integration challenges, and Alec, you hinted at this a little bit earlier, are the reasons why you think utilities are really struggling and having to do more integration and more modification of platforms, perhaps linked to customer expectations?
Sure. Interestingly enough, companies running, a lot of companies running the legacy CISs were the first to do these integrations. So they came up with integration paths to do it, but they were using old technology. The legacy systems are not using current technology. So they have to reinvent things that are already out there right now, like web services or so, or maybe some of these platforms are running on old file-based technologies or so. So, again, the absolute #1 complaint that we're hearing, especially from those that still continue to have legacy implementations, is the cost to modify, the time to modify, and the cost and time also then to do integration with other systems. #1 complaint, sometimes the business unit can't afford to pay the rate to the IT business or the IT organization to make a business modification, so they're spinning up maybe some kind of third system in the environment to handle this other thing because they just can't afford to pay the rates to modify the system. I think something else that we're seeing is the keeping up to date and the access to skills can be an issue with both legacy side and also with some of the commercial off-the-shelf stuff we're seeing right now. There are some markets that are harder to attract people to, and that there is not the expertise in the marketplace to attract people to work on the system. And also the skill sets for some of the new systems require a higher pay rate than the earlier systems. Keeping up to date too can be tough even in the commercial off-the-shelf world as a vendor pushes and pushes and pushes modifications. If you don't have the staff to do all that regression testing, one can get behind, and it's very difficult to catch up. So I think those latter two are definitely can be an issue both on the legacy side and on the commercial off-the-shelf side. But you're right, that modification and integration thing, especially due to the old existing base of technologies of the utility, it's kind of hard for those legacy CIS utilities to get around.
Yeah, thank you. And not unrelated to keeping the platform up to date, modifying it to meet new requirements, integrating with new technologies, we also asked utilities about total cost of ownership and how the total cost of ownership of their platform was playing out against the expectations they had when they implemented it. And while just over half the utilities said that total cost of ownership met their expectations, slightly under a half said it didn't. And in the majority of those cases, total cost of ownership came in above their expectations. I don't know, Alec, if you have thoughts on how might utilities seek to calculate a more predictable total cost of ownership on a platform that's going to be lasting them hopefully for 20 years or more?
I think going into this are the assumptions. You talked about expectations, and expectations are based on assumptions. And I think for some reason that a lot of clients, especially if they've gone over to, let's say, a commercial off-the-shelf system, might believe that they can hire an employee or they can outsource at a wage rate that is equal to what they've been paying existing employees. Many times that's not the case. Also, what we're seeing that as people get more skilled in with some of the new commercial off-the-shelf systems, that they're less likely to remain 30 years employees of the utility, and maybe will then will have a much higher turnover than we did before. So it's kind of an adjustment to our original assumptions based on many times the actual staff that are required to, if they're going to be utility employees, to vis-a-vis wage rates and their propensity, especially as, let's say, millennials, to not stay with the model of staying with the utility for decades at a time.
Thank you. So the next area of the survey that we looked into was to ask utilities what were their major business challenges that they were facing going forward. And I think this quote from Andrew Meola hits on the challenge that came out as the #1 challenge in the survey. The frequency and sophistication of cyber attacks are at an all-time high, and the costs associated with data breaches continue to rise. While companies are investing more in cybersecurity to ward off attacks, they know they won't be able to spend their way to absolute security. And when we look at the priorities identified by the respondents to the survey, security was identified as the biggest challenge, and security in relation to the threat of both physical and cyber security. And I think this not only reflects the critical nature of the assets and services that utilities provide, but also the sensitive personal data that utilities are the custodians of. And it reflects the increasing threat and sophistication of cyber attacks that Andrew noted in his quote. Other challenges that came out of the survey, by far the second highest challenge was the aging workforce. The need to attract a younger generation to the industry, and to your point, Alec, harder and harder to keep the younger employees in one place for a length of time. And managing the risk associated with the significant knowledge that's been built up with existing employees who are approaching the age of retirement. A couple of other things that came out in the survey that weren't necessarily an option on this question. One was customer expectations, and a number of utilities commented on the challenge of keeping up with what they felt were ever-increasing expectations of their customers. And then the other area that was also noted by respondents was regulatory pressures. The challenge of remaining compliant in a rapidly changing regulatory environment that at times can be unpredictable and therefore very hard to plan for. So going back to the customer expectations piece, and Alec, I think you touched on it a little bit, talking about other industries who'd adopted cloud. What do you see as some of the drivers of those increasing expectations, and perhaps examples of where those expectations are being set from experiences outside of the utility industry?
Oh, without a doubt. One-word answer right now is Amazon. The last two investor-owned utilities that I've worked with both mentioned, again, Amazon and other online firms as having the ability to present a much better customer experience than the utilities can right now. In fact, a utility that I've recently worked with actually made a site visit to Amazon to get a feel, knowing that the expectations of the customers, although the business models are totally different, and the potential return that one could use to make such web presence and everything else happen don't necessarily exist in the utility industry like it does for other companies. But it's definitely set the bar to the point that Amazon and other companies are the model to emulate. And again, when we're seeing other channels being used, and I think we'll talk about multiple channels a little bit later on, but our customers, especially younger customers, are expecting far more than we're prepared to deliver right now in terms of customer experience.
Yeah, thank you. And in terms of regulatory requirements, I'd share an example. We're working with one of our clients up in Ontario who are awaiting confirmation of the exact requirements for the new cap-and-trade legislation. And although we are rushing rapidly towards the date at which this will pass into legislation, the exact requirements from a rates and billing perspective have still not been finalized. So we, in support of our client up in Ontario, are under pressure to, as soon as those requirements are clarified, to quickly make sure they're adopted in the system. And because that's a regulatory requirement, it takes attention away from perhaps some of the customer experience priorities that they're looking to meet at the same time. So they're in a situation where they have regulatory pressure to change, but the exact requirements are coming to them fairly late in the day, and they're having to scramble to keep up. And I think that's one example of the type of pressure that regulatory changes are imposing on utilities in terms of disrupting the business as usual. So if we move to the next slide, please, Pam. The next series of questions that we asked utilities in the survey were, what were their priorities in the area of customer experience? And I'm going to share this quote from Tom Raftery of Raftery Consulting. It's typically overlooked, but it's starting to be addressed now. It's how people communicate. SMS text is going out the window. Now it's all Facebook and Twitter, WhatsApp and WeChat. I had to look those things up to understand what they were, personally speaking. That's how people are communicating. So what did our utilities say in terms of customer experience priorities? Well, as Alec hinted, self-service, the multi-channel concept, providing and enriching self-service capabilities was identified as an essential priority by more than 70% of the utilities surveyed. The remaining 30% identified it as a medium or high priority. Perhaps a little bit more surprising was that more than 50% of utilities highlighted credit and collections as an essential priority, even in the environment where the economy has somewhat recovered since 2008. One thing that came up in terms of interest to me was speech analytics. And what we saw when we dived into the data was, although not considered to be essential priority by many utilities, it was identified as a medium or high priority by more than 50% of the utilities, and predictably it was the larger utilities for whom that was a higher priority. And we've worked with a number of our larger clients in speech analytics and have seen a number of areas where it's provided benefit to them. We've seen benefits in areas of program enrollment, being able to track which agents are offering program enrollment, how frequently they're offering it, as well as being able to identify agents who are successful in offering and not successful in offering. And we found two interesting things around program enrollment. One was we found the longest tenured agents struggled to change their behavior to offer new programs the most. And then we also found that there was a significant disparity in success rates between agents who followed the script for enrollment, where the success rate was very high, and agents who didn't follow the script, where success rate was very low. And on the back of the speech analytics, we were able to recommend very targeted training for our client in that area, and we saw double-digit increases in both offer rate and acceptance rate on the group of agents that were really struggling in that area. So we've seen with speech analytics, it's a very powerful tool that can be used for a number of things, but based on the survey, what we understand is that tool has more value for the larger utilities. Social media was a priority for all but one of the utilities surveyed. And the importance of social media can't be ignored on that basis. But the question really around social media is, in what capacity should social media be used by utilities? And again, to sort of just give a little bit of an example, at our Vertex Client Council just over 12 months ago, we invited AT&T to present their social media strategy in their organization. And at that point, they were employing just over 200 FTEs in their social media team. What was really interesting to us was they started the team with their best call center agents, and they now estimate, based on the statistics they have, that every problem that they solve for a customer via social media actually solves on average 10 other customers' problems at the same time. So they found that for AT&T, social media has gone beyond a channel of sentiment analysis and broadcast information towards a genuine channel of customer service. It's going to be interesting to see whether that will happen in the utility industry, and I don't know, Alec, if you have a point of view on that.
Recently moved and the municipal utility near where I live allows customers to report outages via Twitter, as long as it's during normal business days, which I found absolutely amazing. The social media is becoming far more than I personally expected as a route of communication between a utility and its customers, to the point of just broadcasting to the world or direct messaging. I think to us, the challenges that we're seeing for utilities that have the multiple channels but no kind of omni-channel way to knit everything together is the ability that we might engage with the customer as a utility on one channel and then engage with that customer on another channel and have no insight between the two. And the real challenges are in their products and services coming out of around this is, what can we do such that if the person calls the call center, 10 minutes after they did a transaction on the web or they did something with their app on their phone, can we see that they did this, that they tried to enroll in budget billing on their phone, and they tried to enroll in budget billing on the web, and now they're calling in. Well, what might that be about? Likely it's about budget billing, but we could save a whole bunch of time on the phone and probably increase customer satisfaction if every channel knows what's happening on every other channel. And to us, that's the huge challenge right now that may be solved by the omni-channel solutions that are beginning to be out in the marketplace.
So with proliferation of channels and allowing customers to interact through the channel of their choice at the time of their choosing, there are challenges around ensuring a seamless customer experience and a consistent customer experience, I think is what you're saying.
Hugely, and making sure that all of that is available to a CSR who's actually then going to end up interacting with the customer, that the CSR can see that this person has gone through these other channels and done these other things and can lead the conversation with that. That makes the customer feel, among other things, that we've been listening to them and we're paying attention, as opposed to just being totally clueless of the fact that they've already interacted with us electronically already earlier during the day or the day before.
Yeah. So I think in conclusion on the self-service piece, I think we know that customers increasingly want to self-serve. The evidence from the survey that we have is utilities, 70% of utilities see it as an absolute essential priority. What we're starting to see as utilities expand the number of channels through which they interact, some of the challenges of that channel proliferation, but we're also probably seeing benefits as well. I know one of our clients has more than 70% of its customers enrolled in web and mobile self-service. They've been able to use that to drive adoption of paperless billing to well in excess of 30% of their customers. And their call volumes have reduced substantially. They receive, I think, around about 0.7 calls per customer per year, which obviously means their total cost to serve has been able to be reduced without affecting customer satisfaction, because the majority of customers self-serving are happy to serve. So not a surprising trend, but quite a lot more to it than simply proliferate channels. So let's move on to the next slide, please, Pam. And really what we wanted to understand was, with an aging install base of CIS platforms, with some of the challenges around maintaining, updating, integrating, and modifying those platforms, combined with the business challenges that utilities are facing and the customer experience priorities, how are utilities planning to respond or already responding to these challenges? I'll share a quote here from Bob Goen from Navigant Research. Other industries such as banking, insurance, transportation, and telecommunications have undergone similar IT transformations, but the challenge to utilities is the most daunting faced by any industry today. That's probably not going to cheer everybody up on the call, but what did we find in terms of the survey, in terms of the response from utilities to these challenges? So what we looked at was the number of utilities who were planning to replace their CIS platform within the next 2 years, the number of utilities who were making major augmentations to their existing platforms, as well as understand utilities who felt that their platform today met their requirements and they weren't under pressure to make changes. I think surprising to me was that almost 1 in 3 utilities plan to replace their existing CIS within the next 2 years. And when we step back and think about what we all perceive to be the natural life expectancy of a CIS platform, with being in the 20-year mark, this certainly points to a wave of replacements for platforms that simply cannot keep up with customer requirements anymore, or reaching a point of risk from an obsolescence perspective where they become a threat to business. So we were quite shocked just how many utilities were planning on replacing their CIS in the next 2 years. And in fact, of the utilities with a CIS platform that was more than 20 years old, all of them are planning a replacement in those next 2 years. When we look at utilities with a platform 15 years or older, 3 out of 5 of those utilities are planning on replacement. The rest are making significant augmentations to their platform to keep up. When we look under 10 years, the picture changes quite significantly. And while a large number of utilities are not planning to replace or to augment, we still see a fair degree of augmentation, which I think comes back to just the rate of change in terms of customer expectations, the rate of change being driven by regulatory requirements, and the need to keep up with those. So the results from the survey really suggest an almost unprecedented level of activity in terms of CIS replacement and CIS augmentation. Is that consistent, Alec, with what you as TMG are seeing in the work that you're doing with clients in the marketplace?
We're definitely not in a lull, I'll put it that way. We're with utilities that are reaching out to our firm and one would assume our competitors to either do studies or to actually move forward and do some type of procurement. Yes, the market is very much alive, and companies like ours are very, very busy in lining up customers with new solutions. There are dozens of cases where I've spoken to a utility where there's a real a fear, or at least a risk that the marketplace might not have enough participants in it to support all the utilities that would like to swap out their application. Some really big concerns, especially as some look at, especially in the large investor-owned market, that there may not be enough consultants out there, enough firms out there to do an adequate job of taking these firms off of their, again, 20-year-old plus CISs and move them over to new commercial off-the-shelf solutions. So again, we're able to keep pace, but yeah, the market is definitely hot right now.
Thank you. So if we move to the next slide, Pam, please. So given the pressures that utilities are under, and given the significance of the potential changes needed to be made, the next series of questions that we asked in the survey really posed the more general question of whether, in some way, cloud could help utilities to respond. And I'm going to just jump straight into the research. You can see the quotes there on the slide. But if you advance to the next slide, please, Pam. We kind of noted earlier on in the presentation that as a whole, the industry has been slow to adopt cloud, at least for core business platforms like the CIS. When we asked a series of questions, we got some interesting observations, and I'll start with security first, and remembering that security, both cyber and physical, was the #1 business priority for our respondents. 60% of utilities responding perceived cloud as a security risk and remain to be convinced otherwise. And I think this established a little bit of a theme that, if we were to look back at the quotes, increasingly what we're seeing in terms of thought leadership in the industry and thought leadership around cloud is that cloud could be a safer alternative than on-premise. But what's very clear is there's an opportunity to better educate and a real need to convince utilities that that can be the case. And I go back to utilities really are the custodians of not just critical infrastructure, but of personal data about their customers that they are beholden to keep safe. The second area where there was a fair degree of uncertainty was on the ability to capitalize costs associated with cloud. Although 40% of our respondents felt that cloud costs could be capitalized. And certainly we've seen some changes recently in GAAP that may offer encouragement to utilities who believe that cloud can't work for them from a financial perspective. Question for you, Alec. Is there an argument that with the changes in the frequency and sophistication of attacks, that CIS platforms might be safer if they're hosted by a Tier 1 cloud provider than on-premise?
I think we've seen, especially the information technology groups of utilities, almost do a complete 180 on the answer to this question, and that would influence our answer. I think up till very recently, the idea of having all this important data held by some other party gave utilities a great indigestion and the thought that there could be somebody else that would have this data. Now I think as if you look to a chief technology officer or chief information officer at a firm, they're so concerned about their firm's ability to keep all this customer data from being breached, and would love to almost turn it over to some kind of large-scale data center or so that has, you know, dozens and dozens of people that are employed just to figure out what needs to be done to keep the data safe. So again, we're not only seeing this from our kind of view as third-party consultants, but I think the utilities themselves, the technology groups are in the process of doing, again, almost a complete 180 on the thought of who could best keep this customer data from being leaked. Is it us, or is it a firm that does this for a living?
Yeah, thank you. So the other areas that we asked around attitude towards cloud was relation to, you know, could it help utilities to focus more on the core business of serving their customers? Would it provide utilities potentially with greater agility to respond to changing customer expectations, respond to changing regulatory requirements? And thirdly and lastly, could cloud help them to reduce TCO and at least get predictability of TCO in the long term? And I think the balance of the answers to those questions was the feeling that cloud could help in all three of those areas. But I think what was interesting was the number of respondents who weren't really sure whether their answer was yes or no. And that leads me to a second question for you, Alec, really, which is, you know, do you think the potential benefits and pitfalls of cloud for utilities are well understood? And is this an area where perhaps TMG are looking to better understand these and share that insight with customers in the marketplace?
Couple of points on that. What we see now, what we've seen maybe increasing the last 5 years plus with the utilities with whom we work, is much more interest and much more potential acceptance, or much more of a thought that maybe from the accounting group that they could get a favorable ruling on what to capitalize and what not to capitalize. So we're seeing the interest level definitely change at the and the part of utilities. And I think some of that does involve things, especially in that agility factor, to be able to kind of jump and be much more nimble than what they can be right now. Again, I haven't heard it necessarily in relationship to total cost of ownership, but the ability to pivot quickly and respond quickly seems to be something that utilities are being more attracted to. But again, there's still a big question mark over the heads of many people in the space of, you know, of the risk-reward agility versus the security risk, and they just don't know necessarily the fact that that the data can actually theoretically be more secure in a cloud operation than it might be actually on the utilities' own servers. Yeah,
yeah. And so, in part, based on the results of the survey and the apparent opportunity or need to better understand the potential benefits and pitfalls of cloud, we asked TMG if they would put together some thoughts and opinion on what the future of Cloud CIS might look like. And I'm going to hand over to Alec to sort of walk you through some of those thoughts.
Appreciate it, James. Again, if you wouldn't mind, Pam, going to then the next slide. Again, as I've mentioned before, we're seeing changes, and we're seeing changes in attitudes. And again, although many, especially on the investor-owned side of the utility industry, again, appreciate the ability to spend capital and recover based on capital, it does seem like it is becoming less efficient to own and maintain every single piece of hardware and software necessary to run the business. We're seeing, especially in things like the MDM space, where MDM vendors have come in and offered utilities the opportunity to use a platform in the beginning as a cloud service, and it never transitions away from that. More and more meters go on the system, and it stays as a cloud-based offering for the utility. And the adoption rate of those seem to be growing with more and more utilities going through that process all the time. Especially also on the analytics side and on the CRM side, we're seeing more and more, again, adoption of whether it be cloud or picking up one's data, providing it to some kind of third party, and having that party now have the data and needing to secure the data, but running custom analytics to determine, again, when meters are going to slow down or what data might suggest that there's some kind of fault that needs to be dealt with at the customer premise. All of these involve having one's data actually hosted by someone else, even if one is running an on-premise solution. And again, although there's a lot of interest in the cloud, I think some of the biggest things we're seeing right now, as I mentioned before, is really people understanding the security aspects of it, and also things that are very important, let's say like capitalization as well, to understand that, at least in this industry, that depending on the situation, the cloud option may be as desirable as on-premise, if potentially not even more so. Next slide, if you wouldn't mind, Pam. Thank you. Again, this is some of the stuff you saw in the survey. This some of the stuff we've talked about recently. TMG between 2009 and 2014 was owned by another company, and during that time we went from a kind of on-premise solution to a cloud solution for practically everything, ERP, email, or so. And we realized at one point when we were asked questions about it that our data was more secure once it was hosted by a third party than it was when we actually maintained servers in one of our offices. Customers that are going out to the cloud, whether it be full-on for the entire customer offering or just for something more modular, can work with data centers that slice and package up the data such that it's never really in a complete form anywhere. I think one of the downsides that we had when we first went to being a cloud firm, again, much smaller firm, is that was connectivity in certain buildings, connectivity at client sites. And again, you can see that survey data point that's in front of you on the slide about bandwidth to support users. I know I'm seeing that personally in the rate that my cable company keeps giving and keeps upping my bandwidth rate at my home. Again, the ability for us to be connected is ever increasing, which brings down then the threat that we might not be able to hit the data. And again, expenses. Again, the most recent FASB ruling, I think it was last year, that came off and said that one could at least capitalize licenses if licenses exist, is a step in the direction of maybe some even fuller level of capitalization. And again, if this is something that could drive down cost on even a per transaction basis, this may be something that actually improves OpEx and improves our ability then to serve our customers. Pam, next slide, thank you. One thing that I'm sure most of the people on this call have heard is that the commercial off-the-shelf solution providers are all committing to provide something that might be available from a full-on customer perspective sometime next year. Again, you know, we're not going to necessarily say that we know that that's going to be there, but that's what we're hearing from all of our contacts at the software vendors. And we think the smaller, more agile utilities, which you saw earlier in the study, are the ones that have more quickly adopted some newer commercial off-the-shelf systems, might be more early adopters. And also, too, with the idea of that municipal utilities aren't necessarily in that same, I want to spend capital, I'm going to get recovery based on a capital spend. The smaller utilities, municipal utilities, might be on the forefront of this, and the investor-owns, especially large investor-owns, might be on the back end. And again, especially extremely small utilities which don't want to field huge IT staffs might be the ones that gravitate the soonest to this type of solution, and being able to have a state-of-the-art commercial off-the-shelf system, but that does not necessarily require a whole bunch of added IT staff. And again, we're the last 4 investor-owned utilities that my team at TMG has worked with bear out the research that was done by the RIM Solutions Group, another part of our company, that there's huge interest. But I would say there's huge interest, but there's not a lot of information out there. So the delta is taking that interest and making sure that there's good information about, yeah, what are the risks, but also what are the risk mitigators when it comes to cloud. We looked at 3 separate sets of systems and how cloud connected they may have been over time. Obviously, we've been engaging, as utilities, we've been engaging our customers and other parties through standard things like email, through web services. We're now doing more and more on social media, and it was always okay for systems like this to have a connectivity outside the cloud. As I mentioned a little bit earlier, we're doing more and more to actually utilize cloud-ish solutions for other parts of our customer outreach and also data analytics. We're allowing other firms to take our data and run analytics on it. We are, I know of several companies that are using web solutions to have virtual call centers to allow employees to work from home and still be in a call center. And again, those are cloud non-on-site solutions that are being run. The difficulty has been for these key systems of record, both CIS and then again a meter data management. The difference is we're seeing a great leap to off-site non-on-premise meter data management, and so the thought is that although there's been kind of a sticky relationship as one gets further away from that cloud on the left-hand part of the picture, that CIS theoretically is the next one to go to be again a lot more cloud-based, at least for several utilities. Pam, next slide if you wouldn't mind. And again, where are we seeing? We're seeing several companies that have gone with any one of the vendors, and again, the MDM vendors have been pretty upfront, and in order to maybe gain market share or to gain new customers to offer MDM solutions that are quote unquote in the cloud, and we're seeing a very good adoption with them, sometimes with the thought of converting over to on-premise, and sometimes that actually never happens. What we are seeing in multiple cases, including with cases that are customers of Vertex One, is this ability now of using a CIS, which is outsourced, which is cloud-based, and again, which they can, with fewer employees, still provide the same level of, again, CIS functionality. So it's happening, and it may be happening quicker on the MDM space, but it's also happening on the CIS level as well. James, can I turn it back to you?
Thank you, Alec. So some quick conclusions, and then we'll open up for Q&A. I guess the conclusions from the survey, first of all, from an install base perspective, the respondents to the survey are running on an aging on-premise CIS installed base. More than 1 in 3 operating a CIS platform that's 15 years or older. Utilities are struggling to keep those CIS platforms up to date and find it difficult to make modifications and integrate new technology without third-party help. Rightly, they're concerned about physical and cybersecurity, an aging workforce, and keeping up with customer expectations being influenced from outside the industry. Customer experience priorities, big focus on self-service, and we talked about not just the benefits, but some of the challenges associated with channel proliferation. Credit and collections is an essential priority, but some of those things bring their own challenges, as we mentioned, and questions really remain on exactly if and how social media will evolve as a channel for genuine customer service in the utility industry going forward. What we do see very strong evidence of in the survey is utilities are responding to some of these challenges and priorities, and they're responding in the way that more than 30% of those surveyed are planning to replace their CIS platforms in the next 2 years, and even utilities with a CIS less than 10 years old are having to augment that platform to keep up with those expectations. And from a cloud perspective, lastly, I think there's an increasing belief that cloud may be part of the answer, But generally speaking, to date, there's a lack of information around benefits and pitfalls, and utilities, rightly being conservative, remain to be convinced about some elements, including security. So there's a need and desire for better education on that front. Over to you, Pam, for Q&A.
Thank you so much, Alec and James. That was a lot of information, really informative, and I expect it prompted a few questions from our listeners. So I believe that John had, at the beginning of the presentation, let everybody know how to enter your questions in the Q&A box and direct them to all. We have one that's come in now, and I would like to pose it, and James and Alec, just chime in, whoever would like to take this. The question is, some utility IT groups fear that using a third-party vendor for CIS makes it difficult to control future support costs. They fear they have no control and risk unusually high price increases moving forward. Please comment. Thank you.
Sure. Are you okay if I jump in first, Alec?
Please.
Okay. So I'll talk very much from a Vertex One perspective, and I hope people understand why I would do so. So in terms of our offering of a cloud CIS solution, we actually see this as an area of benefit to our clients, in that we can offer a very predictable total cost of ownership associated with guaranteed service levels. So from an implementation perspective, our relationship with our clients is not one and done in the project. We sign up for long-term contracts where we're providing with a very clear pricing mechanism and therefore a very predictable TCO, guaranteed levels of service around system accessibility, system performance, batch completion schedules, interface completion schedules. So I think there is an opportunity, and utilities are very right to demand a predictability in terms of total cost of ownership, as well as guaranteed service levels. And as part of the subscription fees that we charge, we also keep the platform up to date. So major upgrades that have in the past been very difficult to do because of the disruption to the business are included within the SaaS fees that we charge. Again, coming back to our desire is to provide a predictable total cost of ownership so the utility can plan its expenditures not just in the area of IT, but outside IT as well.
And quick add to that, although I see we have more questions coming in, James, there is competition in the marketplace depending on the service, and I think that's one of the checks on a firm kind of ever increasing their cost. There are firms, and there are more and more firms in this space, maybe not exactly in the Vertex One area, but in so many other areas, that there is a marketplace that is allowing, if you're not happy with the service or you feel you're being priced out of the market, then there are other firms to go to, even with these kind of longer-term contracts. So it should provide, as James said, a little bit more predictability moving forward.
Okay. I see another question, so let me read the question out, and then I'll have first crack at it and pass it to you, Alex. Are you seeing utilities installing third-party user interfaces across operating companies or across different back-end CIS systems to provide a single user interface to share with front office workforces? I've seen this a couple of times. One was a very large transmission distribution provider here in Texas with a number of legacy billing systems, and they chose to implement a CRM platform across those systems to provide not only consistency of user interface across those platforms, but also in reflection to the changing requirements of utilities, not just taking meter readings and converting them into bills and collecting cash, but actually better understanding their customers and engaging their customers. So whilst not purely a user interface, a more rich layer of CRM, it's certainly something that I've seen examples of. I don't know if you've seen similar, Alec.
Oh, definitely. It's a potentially cost-effective way of allowing for a single front-end platform to deal with multiple back-end sets of customers, especially if one's in kind of an acquisition mode over time. I think something else you've got to deal with on top of that then is the single reporting platform. But at some point, when you know that the back-end systems still don't have exactly the same functionality, at some point there still is the desire to then pick them up from these separate platforms and put them on a single platform that is a single set of functionality, as it were.
Okay. I know we have one or two other questions that have come in, but I think we're running out of time. We're going to have to wrap. Perhaps we can respond afterwards, after this session, to the people who've raised those questions, particularly on the gap accounting. But let me hand back to you, Pam.
Yes, thank you for that. So really good questions coming in. Please rest assured that we will get back to each of you that have asked them. And even as we're closing out, if you're thinking of something, go ahead and type it into the console, and we will get back to you on a one-to-one basis afterwards. So just in some closing comments, first I would like to thank our presenters and thank everyone who attended today. I'd also like to quickly share how attendees can get their own copy of the survey results that we discussed today. So there's a URL shown here on the slide where you can download the research. I appreciate that it is a little long, so you can also get the URL when CS Week sends you the copy of the presentation slides, which I believe they will do in their follow-up. So with that, allow me to turn the presentation back over to John of CS Week.
Well, it was a great presentation. Alec, James, a lot of information. Well done, guys. So very, very good. Pam, excellent as always. And so at this time, we are nearing the top of the hour, and we want to be respectful of everyone's time and conclude promptly. The questions that have come in, we will get those questions. Amber from our office will get these questions to the presenters, and we'll get them back to you, and we'll do a one-on-one, get you that information. Again, we want to thank Vertex One, TMG Consulting, and all the attendees for joining us today. At this time, this does conclude our webinar. Hope you have a great day.